Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Martin. I'm a gerontologist, and with me today is Jimmy Emmons. He's an incredible international speaker on regenerative farming, and we're going to talk to you today about soil health and human health and the connection between the two, and why this is really the biggest hot topic, the most important thing that we could be talking about and contributing to as individual consumers, as producers, and as organizational leaders in our communities. We're going to be talking about how the aging population and soil health connects directly to each other. It's a really exciting topic. It's really inspiring because it's something that can bring health and wellness not only to our environment, our soil, our animals, but to each other and to the entire world. So I want to have Jimmy start with introducing himself and talking about what his story is, how he got to this point, and why this matters to him so much. Thank you, Jimmy.
Well, thank you, Erin. Thanks for having me here today. So, Jimmy Emmons from Dewey County, Oklahoma, in far northwest Oklahoma. My great-granddad brought my granddad to the farm in 1926. They had 12 children. They had so many children that they named two brothers Martin, Marvin, the same name. And that's when you have too many children, when you do that. But anyhow, so we still own and operate that property as well as others. And so I was brought up in a traditional tillage, conventional system of agriculture. And that's the way it was back then. And I put my first crop in at age 9. And then in 1995, I knew things weren't right. Erosion rates were really up. Our inputs were going up and up and up. And so we started this thing called no-till, which was very, very new in our area. And we worked on that a while, struggled a little bit, but, everything has failures. And then I heard this great speaker talk at a national conference named David Brandt from Carroll, Ohio. And David had been doing this thing called cover crops in regenerative ag for quite some time there, and was very popular and was making significant changes to his soil and everything there on his farm. And I said, well, if he can do it in Carroll, Ohio, how come I can't do it in, Dewey County, Oklahoma? So we started that project 10 years ago, and what a change it came to our soil, our land, our crops. It's been a real regenerative type of transformation. And to start out with, it was all about soil health and cover crops, and then the word regenerative come along. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? What is that? Well, technically, we degraded our land through tillage and chemicals over the years. Mm-hmm. If you remember your grandparents, my grandparents, they ate from the garden. Right. They didn't wash them vegetables in chemicals and try to, they washed them in a little water. And a lot of times we just ate them right there in the garden. Right. They both lived way up into their 90s. My granddad got killed in a car accident, or he would have lived to be over 100, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So then you look at our health today as a nation and globally, and that health is not the same as it was then. And why is that? And that's really when I started zeroing in on soil health and how that really plays a critical role in the plants that we raise, the animals that consume that we consume, and all the fruits, vegetables, nuts, everything that goes with that. And that really ties together healthy soil, healthy ecosystem, healthy farm, then creates healthy food, which if you eat healthy food, what does that do to your body?
It creates healthy humans and a healthy planet. And that's so important to understand. And so hang with us if you don't know what some of those terms are. We're going to get into the weeds of that and define some of those things. Regenerative farming is what you'll hear a lot of. Tillage, no-till. We'll talk about the principles of regenerative farming. So everybody has kind of come to this realization who's inspired by it and really passionate about it from different angles, right? So Jimmy was a farmer, and he understood that what was affecting his land, what was affecting the things that he did every day. And I come through it from a totally different angle, right? So When I was 15 years old, I started working at a retirement community for 55 and older people. And you'd think, what the heck does that have to do with soil health? And why do you care about it? And I'm going to tell you why. So I was immediately drawn to these older people. I loved them. I just fell in love with them. And I was drawn to the wisdom of older people, the authenticity. They didn't care what anyone else thought. They said whatever came through their mouth, and I loved all of their stories. And as a 15-year-old, that was really all I knew and understood about the world of older people. And that's really where it started. And I realized that was a passion of mine. I really enjoyed working with them, and I thought in a world where people hate their jobs, that might be something I need to go with. So when I was looking for a master's program, I looked into gerontology, which is the study of aging. In the School of Gerontology that I went to at USC, the University of Southern California, we were founded by the founder of AARP. And in the late 70s, this school was created. It's the only freestanding school of gerontology in the world. Wow. And what we are trained on, it's a social work-based field. So I'm not a doctor, but I'm trained on how to navigate all of these systems. So I understand the psychological changes of aging, the physiological changes of aging, and the social and cultural impacts of aging in different areas of the world, how it impacts a family system, and what the systems are of long-term care. So I was trained by attorneys in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And at that time, I became the director of social services over 7 affordable housing sites for older adults. And that's where I saw what low-income seniors were facing as far as what were the issues as far as medically, what food they had access to, what the insurance paid for, and what it didn't pay for. And what I saw was what I defined as a lot of unnecessary suffering. And I thought we could be doing so much better.
Oh, we can.
We could be doing so much better. And so that's when I started understanding the blue zones of the world where people age the longest in the entire world. They're living until they're 110, even 120 years old. And what was it that they were doing? And the biggest piece of it was local food.
That's right.
And I still hadn't made the connection to soil health yet. But I was introduced to soil advocacy through Kiss the Ground out in Los Angeles at the time. And they were teaching things about regenerative farming. And we read a lot of research about soil health and how that connects directly to the food health, which, like just Jimmy said, is directly coordinated with people's human health and the health of the world. So that's why I became so passionate about it. That means as a gerontologist, I have to be advocating for the soil, or I'm not advocating for humans and for family members and friends and my community to age successfully as a gerontologist should. So that's how I arrived at it. And hopefully that gives you a good picture of why Jimmy and I are meeting and why we both care about this and how we're building this bridge from healthcare, long-term care to the agricultural world, because we're all in this together, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to have Jimmy first kind of talk about what's the picture of like our current state of soil conditions and what is just the current landscape of what's going on and what the problems are.
Well, the real problems is when the original native prairie was here in Oklahoma, we had 3 to 4% organic matter. And people will say, well, what's organic matter? Well, it's really the base of the soil. It's the carbon in the soil. It's the nutrients. It's also the biological community. There's more living entities below ground than there is above ground that works for us every day. And what happened was when we broke out the prairie and we started to tilling for crops and whatnot, we started to degrading that system. And if you've ever worked in your garden and when you turn over soil, you feel really good and this soil feels so really rich and you love that smell.
Yeah, it smells good. You've shown me that.
Yeah, well, it's actually the carbon gassing off into the air. And so that has multiple factions that affect everything. So if you were going to take water at your tap today and you wanted to filter that some, what would you use? You would use a carbon filter.
Right.
Now, that carbon filter was naturally in the soil. We have reduced that by about 80%.
Yikes.
So, that also affects the water quality in our aquifers and our streams, because it was originally designed to be part of the filtering system. But it affects the water holding capacity that we have. When it rains, it's supposed to percolate down through the soil, purify itself, come out in a spring or in an aquifer.
Right, fully mineralized, which is what we need.
So we have reduced our infiltration rates by 95% due to tillage, poor grazing, different things that we do on land practices. So it's really affected the whole ecosystem of our landscape, which then affects what we produce on that land or from that land. And so then it really ties into the food quality. Plus, years ago, we didn't have synthetic fertilizer and chemicals. We never used them. And then this terrible thing that came along called World War, and then we tried to decide how to kill one another, and we built bombs and everything. When World War II was over, we were left with this abundance of this thing called nitrogen and chemical synthetic fertilizers. And what we found was when we put that on the soil, it made things grow really good, and everybody thought it was the greatest thing. Well, it has a place, don't get me wrong. There's a small place for it. But overuse and extended use has really decimated our soil. And all the chemicals then that comes with it, because as plants, healthy plants never have a pest or an insect or a disease problem. We always see that move in when the plants are stressed, either in a drought, lack of nutrients. You can go down they're like us. When we're stressed, things happen to our body.
Affects everything.
And it affects everything. It's like going to the doctor when you're all stressed out. Your sugar can get high.
Blood pressure spikes, all the things.
Yes, so it's everything is created the same, Erin. Every living thing on this planet, below ground and above ground, has to have water, has to have oxygen. It breathes in, it exhales, and then everything it takes in comes out somewhere else in the rear end as nutrients. So as we affect that whole community, we affect the whole ecosystem's life. And that then in turn affects the plants and their growth. They get weak, they get stressed, then disease, pests come along. So what we've learned in the last 10 years is we have to have healthy soil. And if we don't have healthy soil, we don't have healthy plants. And then, as you can confirm, we don't have healthy bodies. And so it's real concerning. And I done a great talk here a while back about the state of our soil and kind of trying to come at it from the perspective of the State of the Union, that how the president always gives his thoughts on how we are as a nation. And as a nation in our soils, I give it a C-, because the number one thing that we export nowadays from America and from the world, what would you think that is?
I don't know.
You would think of a crop
or
something that we ship out of the country.
Oil and gas.
Yeah, oil and gas. Any of that. No, it's soil. We run off, deplete, erode away nearly 2 billion tons of soil each year out of the United States. That's our number one export. And that is the topsoil that creates all our food. So, that's something that's really alarming. And we got the time clock ticking here in front of us today.
Yeah.
That we don't have that much time. We can't continue to erode, because all ancient civilizations that you look back at, you look at some of the greatest civilizations, the reason they're not here is they didn't take care of their soil. They didn't figure that out, and they run out of nutrition and food to feed their people. And that's not what we want to do.
No, that's the biggest thing that I realized, and how I made the connection with soil health and human health is that actually plants don't just read the nutrients in the soil. With all this like billions of tons of chemicals that we use on the earth every single year, and most of it actually being in the United States, we are killing fungi and organic soil matter that translate the nutrients from the soil to the food. So the food is incredibly nutrient deficient, and humans need all the things that Jimmy said, and we need vitamins and minerals to run processes in the body. They are responsible for hydration, which is the body's natural detox process. They run all of the different processes in our body, and if we're deficient in those vitamins and minerals because our food doesn't have it in there, then our bodies are taxed. And so that's why we're seeing an incredible increase in chronic conditions and diabetes and cancer rates, you name it, dementia, hormone imbalances, all sorts of problems. They say in the United States, if you're 50 years old, you have at least one chronic condition. And if you're 65 or older in the United States, you're on 15 or more prescription drugs per year. And so that is due to not having all the things that we need. And then on top of that, prescription drugs strip our bodies of vitamins and minerals, and certain ones depending on the prescription drugs. So we have to really understand, and we're going to paint a little grim picture. We are going to come into the solutions and talk about what's so exciting and what's being done about this. But the current state is catastrophe. We're losing topsoil at an incredible rate. We're losing people very early on to all these chronic conditions. People are living longer, but not better. They're living really poorly for longer, strung out on all the medications and dependent on these things instead of eating local fruits and vegetables that have nutrients in them. But what's so great about regenerative farming is that it creates nutrient density. It creates healthy food. And one of the things that you were talking about, grandparents, for example, with an orange, you used to be able to get percentage of vitamin A and vitamin C from one orange, right? Nowadays, with all the degradation of soil and all the chemicals, you have to eat 6 to 8 oranges to get that same percentage, which is why you see people juicing and doing all these things trying to be more efficient. And then you have this racket of like vitamins, and vitamins are great because we actually need them. We should be getting them from our food. But then we have artificial vitamins, and we're treating our bodies with things that are made in a laboratory where our body doesn't have the organic matter to read those vitamins and minerals. So we've seen older adults at a high rate overdosing on vitamin supplements because your body can't read it, and you use maybe 15% of it, and then you have all this other stuff floating around. And so we have this huge platform of a big problem: soil health, human health. Our systems are taxed, and I think COVID really highlighted a lot of those issues, which is good because these are obstacles that are considered opportunities. And so we want to talk about that. And so now I think we should go back to talk about the 5 principles of regenerative farming, define tilling, define a little bit more about soil organic matter, and just define what regenerative farming actually is, just kind of on a high level for people that have no clue.
Sure. And first of all, I want to address one thing. As we talk about degrading the soil, my granddad and dad never understood what they were doing. They were doing what they were taught. They done the best they could do with the tools that they had, much like most agriculturists are today. But now we have better tools. We know better what we can do.
Yeah, new research.
So no, it's all about education, and that's one of the reasons that we're here today is to try to get this out. So when we talk about regenerative ag, we have these set of principles, and there's 6 principles about how to take care of the land and really understand what's going on. So the number 1 is context. And how do you look at your farm, your ranch, and envision what it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, to really understand how the system was working. And, when you look at that, it was always covered. And when I say covered, that's with plants and plant material. And in nature, things grow up, it produces, and then it falls down. Animals, some eat, but it all falls down and then it recycles and grows back up the next year. So it was always covered, and keeping it covered keeps it protected from the sun and the elements of weather. So that's very important. It also had a living root in the ground, 365 or nearabouts. Further north you go, the more limited that is. The further south you go, growing 365 is very easy. So that's another principle. And diversity of animals, diversity of plants. The native prairie, depending on where you looked at it, somewhere between 100 and 500 plants in a normal native prairie system. Of course, the bigger the area you looked at, the more diverse it was. The smaller, you might have 100. But anyhow, it had lots of diversity of plants in it. And so that also gives diversity of the biological community, because much like us, they like to eat different things as well. And they trade on that amongst themselves. So that's a very good principle. Diversity of animals. If you looked at the native prairie that we had, it had very much diversity, in animals. Lots and lots of animals, which we don't have nowadays, because
people just do one animal or one crop, and they have the pretty little defined lines in between the crops, and we think that looks pretty because we've been trained that way. It's actually really, really bad.
Right. We found out that we grow multiple things together, but really the indigenous people, the tribal members, the three sisters concept, where they grew three things together, they knew that years and years ago. And so what we done was, no, we're going to grow one thing. And we're going to grow one thing very well. And that really came from the world wars too, as well, because there was a call that we had to feed the world.
Sure.
And then we started narrowing in on production, yield, and we had to raise more because we were going to feed the world.
Right.
And that's very honorable. That's the right thing to do. But it turns out it was the wrong thing to do in the wrong system. We still could have done that the way we're doing it, but we focused in on the monoculture. And so that really started degrading the land and the soil. And then with tillage, that came erosion. And in the 30s, we saw one of the greatest catastrophes worldwide in the Dust Bowl. But if you really look at the true things here in Oklahoma, in the 30s, we actually lost more soil to water erosion during the drought than wind. Wind caught a lot of it because you could really see it. But normally, during a drought or following a drought, what do you have? You have big rain events and flooding. And when you had all that bare soil and fine dust, it erodes very rapidly.
Like whoosh,
yes.
Goes right
and so
off.
we lost tons and tons and hundreds of thousands of tons of quality soil. So then that's when the amendments started coming along. We could add synthetic fertilizer, and the crops grew better. And so it was very good for the farmers and the ranchers, and, things started growing like it was before. But once again, everything in moderation. No matter what we do, everything in moderation. You can Dr. Pepper, you could.
Yeah, you can drink too much water, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, lots of, it's not just Dr. Pepper or anything. It's anything that you do in moderation.
Right.
And we took it to the extreme the other way.
Right.
And so with them principles now in regenerative ag, if you apply them, what we start seeing is that the soil starts changing. Our organic matter starts coming back. We start capturing sunlight, converting that into plants, which capture CO2 out of the atmosphere. If you hear a lot about high concentrations of CO2 and greenhouse
change, and all the things going on.
If you look at NASA's research, when the growing year is very active in North America and all the corn and soybeans and all sorts of the crops are growing, CO levels drop in dramatic levels. But then as harvest time and fall comes, it starts rising, and through the winter it just keeps rising and building up. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out we need something green and growing in the winter months if we can. And we can do that even in colder climates. We can do that.
Right.
And so that's how important regenerative ag is to rebuild, regrow, restore what we have depleted. and do that in a natural way. And then as them plants become healthy, we become less dependent on synthetic fertilizer, chemicals,
prescription drugs.
Yes, all the inputs that has eroded the profitability out of farming and ranching. And so it's not about the yield, it's about how much you spend. It's just much like in life. You know, you can spend your way in luxury to going broke. So it's that same concept, and that's how we become more profitable in our food. Our animals are more nutritious, and so then our bodies start being more nutritious.
And that's why regenerative agriculture and farming techniques is so exciting, because this has this incredible ripple effect, right? We just talked about how it affects human health, soil health, and our climate change problem that we have. So it not only is increasing the soil organic matter, which is increasing vitamins and minerals in the soil, which that's where the food has to get it from. It gets it from the soil. So it's increasing the soil organic matter in our soil, improving the health, improving the vitamin and mineral content that ends up in our food, that ends up in our bodies. And then it also, what you'll hear is a word called carbon capture. And so it's taking the CO2 from the air and into the soil where it needs to be. And our bodies are carbon-based bodies. Like, that is what we're made of the most. And so our medicine has to be the same way. There's a lot of people that say if our bodies are made of carbon, so should our medicine. And that's really, really important. So that's why regenerative agriculture has this profound effect, because it has this ripple effect that affects everything. And that's what we're really trying to drive home today. So we've really painted kind of a really sad picture. Like, you know, we had this information, and what we had, we did the best with what we had at the time. And now we've learned more, and there's new research. And so now we've seen and have the ability to not only go back to what maybe our grandparents had in their fruits and vegetables, but even to improve that nutrient density. So
far above that.
Yeah, and far above that. So if you could think that we're all operating at like 50% capacity, and just imagine like, wow, we're really amazing humans as it is, and we do a lot as it is. Could you imagine what we could accomplish if our soil was fully mineralized and it was giving our plants the vitamins and minerals that it needs? So like from that orange, it gets the vitamin C and the vitamin A from a fully nutrient rich soil that is not full of chemicals, that is then in turn causing all of these issues that we're seeing as people age older and older. So there's local issues, there's worldly issues. Obviously, climate change is a worldly issue. Yeah. And we also have local issues because we don't have a lot of local farmers. So can you talk a little bit about why local food and local farmers is so important? And I'll add to it as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's we apply that on our farm and ranch, and what that really means is, as we grow seeds and we grow animals and we grow it in our environment, eating their local food, whether that be the plants or the animals, then they start getting acclimated to that environment locally. The same way with human health as well. So if you're acclimated to Tulsa, Oklahoma here, and the weather and the temperature, the moisture, the plants and everything, then it's naturally better for you to consume vegetables and beef and other things that are grown locally.
Where your immune system was built.
And when our grandparents were in this world, and before them, it was easy because we didn't travel very far. In the modern age of technology came these things called planes and automobiles and trains that allowed us to start moving. And the further we moved, the further we got away from that local food, local health that was coming from that soil. And it just got worse and worse through the years as we went. So our plants and our animals that stay on the farm are very acclimated to that local environment, their food, and a healthy system, and then they are produced as healthy. So that is very, very important in how we do that, and why it's important to have good vegetables here in Tulsa for the program that you're working on. And that can be replicated and is across many, many parts of the country and the world. And that's why you were talking about indigenous people and certain areas in the country and the world that they're very healthy. If you really look at them, they're eating all their fruits, vegetables, their proteins, all locally.
Right. And when it's shipped, we've gone to this model where we're having to source all of our food from Mexico or from other states or overseas. And what we see is there's a bunch of issues with this, number one. But what we see is that even though our food is already nutrient deficient, right? We've already painted that picture. So our soil is deficient, our food is deficient, humans are deficient. But when it's shipped, it loses nutrients too. So just for example, spinach loses 95% of its nutrients within 24 hours. So I like to say if it's not local, it's not nutrient dense. It's probably not super nutrient dense anyway, just depending on who you're getting it from. But if it comes from a far place, then it's not going to be nutrient dense. And things are also picked prematurely so that they look like they're, quote, ripe, but it means they haven't been fully developed in their nutrient and mineral content either. So by the time we get our food, the food, even you could think Whole Foods has great food, and we appreciate, and I'm grateful for Whole Foods, but if it's shipped out of state and it's not local, then it's really not going to have a lot of nutrients in it. And that's one of the biggest problems.
Well, and as our lives got more complicated, we started traveling more, we were doing more. We started that process of getting away from the homesteads, and the workforce then started moving to metropolitan areas. And, you know, if you look back in history, you know, in Oklahoma, there was probably at least 1 to 2 families for every 160 acres, and a lot of times more than that, but generally as a whole 1 to 2 families. Now in a normal operation, you know, there's probably a tenth of a family on 160. You know, we're farming and ranching on about 10,000 acres thereabouts, and we're not considered large, you know, and we're still a family farm. But what's happened was the older generations are passing on. The kids that moved to town to get a job and stuff are not there.
They don't want to maintain,
and so there's
all
no
that.
one else to farm and ranch. So what does Jimmy do? He gets a little bit bigger and takes on the neighbor, and then the neighbor. And before long, you're kind of the hamster on the wheel. You don't know where to get off because, you know, and bigger sometimes is not better. And that's what we have chosen. That's the reason we've shrank our operation some now from where we was. And we're trying to get better at what we're doing instead of getting bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see why, to me, like regenerative, it's not the answer for everything, but it's an answer for a lot of things. And that's
More
so
than
I
you
say
think.
like regen cures it all. I mean, it really has this incredible ripple effect. So I want to talk about what are you currently doing in the world in your work, and what are some of the movements that are currently happening to address some of these issues?
So, you know, 10 years ago, as I stated, that's when I got started down this path. And it was just trying to find partners to help me figure this system out, because once again, it's all about education. You just don't start today and know everything. I mean, I've been working 10 years at it, and I'm still learning daily about how to do this. And so when I started, I reached out to partners like the Oklahoma Conservation Districts, the Oklahoma Conservation Commission, which now I work for as a mentor and in charge of their mentoring, NRCS, the Natural Conservation Service here in Oklahoma, Noble Research Institute in Ardmore, and said, can you guys work together with me to figure this out? And then also be the third-party verifiers that says this is what Jimmy's doing, this is the benefits that's coming from that. And so we started that process. And then all at once, I started hosting field days to share what I was doing. And then people started asking me, well, could you come to our place, our farm, or our conference? And then that started the speaking thing, and so that's really grown. I'll be in about 12 different states between now and in February. And so that just keeps evolving, and we keep really trying to press on with groups, support groups, things like Oklahoma Soil Health, Western Soil Health, and there's lots of different things on Facebook, Twitter, all the outlets that we have in social media today, as well as organizations like Regenerate Oklahoma, Great Plains Regeneration. There's so many places that we can go now to help learn from that I didn't have 10 years ago, or David Brandt that 30 years ago when he started in Carroll, Ohio, he just had himself. So now it's like we went from a single one-room school to now that we have bigger size consolidated schools, and now we have higher education that's really acceptable and close to us in that framework of regenerative ag that says we're here to help you. And that's the reason you and I do what we do, because we feel the passion in our hearts to share out how we can do this. And it's very important to know that we're not in this for the dollars or the recognition or the traveling and speaking. It's to help others learn what I've learned, because, if I'd had that knowledge when I started 10 years ago, look how much further down the road I would be. And so I want to share what's happening on the farm. I want people to understand what we've done out of necessity. And now it's time for another necessity, and that's, regenerative ag, and trying to figure it out and trying to tie all this together. That's not just about Jimmy. It's not just about Erin. It's about everyone and every living thing on this planet. Like I said earlier, we're all created equally, and together we all operate the same, where it's a small, minute thing that you have to look at a microscope by 500 power to see, or an elephant. We all operate the same, and we all depend on what? Soil.
Absolutely.
Everybody says water. Well, water comes from the soil.
And it retains it.
Yes.
Right.
And so it's so critical to look at it and understand it's everything we are. And we have to quit destroying it. We've always, called it dirt, but we've treated it like dirt. And it really deserves the respect to be called soil. And as a living entity that we can embrace, and it will help us grow nutritious foods that feeds our families across the globe.
As above, so below.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's so important, because I think people don't realize that this even affects your mood. When you don't have the vitamins and minerals that you need and your body is over-chemicalized, about 80% of the people in my Food is Medicine program that I'll talk a little bit about, they report having anxiety and depression. And I think even if you haven't been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, we all have experienced that at some rate. And if we're deficient in vitamins and minerals, it means our minds are not going to be working how they are. It can also contribute to overthinking and different anxieties. And so people don't understand that this can impact your relationships. They can impact the choices that you're making. This can impact your success or failures in your relationships, your personal, professional relationships. This has an endless ripple effect. And so Fresh RX is a program that we're running here in North Tulsa. It's a Food is Medicine program. It's something that a doctor prescribes fruits and vegetables. And in this particular program, we source local, mostly organic, and when we can, regenerative food that is going to be more nutrient dense, because what we're measuring is their A1C level, which is their measure of their hemoglobin level. This tells you how far along they are in their diabetes. So if they have an A1C over 8, it means that they are borderline risking hugely to have a stroke, kidney failure, to lose a limb. And these things affect not only that person, they affect the family unit, and they affect the community when people become disabled. And there's a lot of healthcare costs that are associated with this. So if we reduce the A1C level from 1% to 2%, We actually reduce the healthcare costs by $16,000 to $24,000 per person per year. And in this program, it only costs us about $3,000 for the entire year. So $3,000 versus $16,000 to $24,000. That's a huge deal. And I always joke with people, I'm saying, if you don't care about humans, then at least the money even makes sense. So I think our problem from before was that we were really looking at with the intention of the money that we can make and the production that we can create.
Yes.
And the problem is that has only degraded the quality of everything that we're experiencing and the problems that we're seeing now. And so if we can come at it from this wellness standpoint and the health of things, it does affect the bottom line. So don't worry, it will still make money,
yes,
but it will be in a different way, in a healthier way, and a more regenerative way that we could see people actually regenerate at any age. And that's what's really important to know, that even people in their 80s and 90s can experience benefits from having local food. So in the Fresh RX program, we focus on people with uncontrolled diabetes in North Tulsa, particularly, which is in a food desert. They just got their first grocery store in 10 years.
Wow.
And so we source local food. And then we also, like you said, the education component. We can't just throw fruits and vegetables at people that are used to going to McDonald's. We educate them. So we do some cooking demos and some nutrition classes. And most of all, we say, hey, you can do this. You're worth it. And this is going to work. And even though I know this and you know this,
yep,
when they start seeing those numbers drop, these light bulbs go off, everything Erin said wasn't just a bunch of hooey-fooey stuff.
That's right.
She actually knows what she's talking about. And because we source more nutrient-dense foods, even if they're just eating a little bit of it and it's just an introduction more into their diet, then they are still, what they're eating is nutrient-dense. So even if they just eat a few things, it's still getting more nutrient density. So I'm really excited about the missions of Regenerate Oklahoma. There's lots of these different organizations that Jimmy mentioned. Jimmy's been to how many states since you started speaking about this?
Well, I'm working on 38 right now.
38 states. So the mission is getting out there. The word is getting out there. And I like to share just some last calls to action and how you can get involved. And then we'll just bring it home.
Sure.
So I think for people, this is a lot of overwhelming information. It's a lot of new information. It's like, wow, I didn't realize that, or that affects me. And what do I do with all of this information? So I like to give people some really small things you could start implementing now. And one of the things is really obvious to some people, maybe not to others, but to shop at your local food market. So go to your farmer's market that's in your city. Most places have them now. The demand is growing because the awareness is growing. So you can shop there. For example, Tulsa has one every Saturday morning from 7 to 11 in the morning. So you do have to get up a little earlier. If you don't want to go to your farmer's market, you can find a local food producer, and a lot of them have something called a CSA, which is Community Supported Agriculture. But essentially that is a food subscription to their farm, and you can pay a certain amount of money and you get a weekly box or a bi-weekly box or bag of local food. And so and what you want to do is you want to ask those farmers, what are your practices? Because we don't have a certification yet, but you don't know if someone's regenerative unless you just ask the question.
Well, you need to know your farmer and rancher and where the food comes from. They need to be your friend.
Yes.
And so that you understand how they grow their produce, how they grow their gardens, their all their crops.
Yeah.
And so that you truly understand where your food's coming from. We've really got disconnected from that.
Yes, we have.
I mean, that's been one of the big things that the big disconnect that has really started this all, not knowing where your food comes from. You pick up something in a regular grocery store, you have no idea there is a label on there and you can finally look, but a lot of people never look at that. And I think that's very important to know your food
Read the ingredients.
Know your body, know your food. So
yeah, know your local farmer. So make those connections. I always promote a more plant-based diet. This does not mean cutting out meat and cheese. This means just limiting your meat to not every single day. If I say start with a meatless Monday, so that it's just one thing, one day a week. So it's not this, oh gosh, you want me to go vegan? No, that's not what I'm saying.
Oh, I hope not.
No, yeah. No, not what I'm saying, but these are really simple things. A meatless Monday, sourcing locally for your food, going outside of the grocery store, kind of that hamster wheel, like try to get off that a little bit and go outside of the grocery store. Just start eating more fruits and vegetables in general, even if you just go to the grocery store. Those are two really easy things that you can start doing now. So I want to just inspire everyone that regenerative farming is this incredible thing. We need more producers for sure. Our average age is like 65 for producers. We need more producers. We need younger folks who are really invested in this. So what you can do is you can follow me, Erin Martin, expert on aging, on Instagram and on Facebook. We have a Facebook and Instagram for both Regenerate Oklahoma. There's a lot of different places where you can get connected in. Of course, you can go on my YouTube channel, Conscious Aging Solutions. You can go to my website, consciousagingsolutions.com, for more information. Where else can people find you, Jimmy?
You know, I've got a lot of YouTube videos out there, Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm very accessible in the social media world. Just Google up Jimmy Emmons, and it'll take you to everything I've really done. And Erin, one thing I want to close on, and you know, I've really trademarked this a few years ago, and it's long live the soil. And people ask me, you know, why do you say that, and why is your handle on Twitter long live the soil? Because it better, because without it we have nothing, and we've really abused it and used it with no respect over the past 100 and 200 years, depends on where you're at in the world. You know, and we don't want to be like the Romans. The Romans were the great people of the world and great architects and built great things. And what happened to them? They destroyed their soils, and they kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger and bigger to feed their people. And what happened was they couldn't feed their people, and they got very, very angry. And then when the barbarians come along, they were very easy to overthrow. Mm-hmm. And it was all because of destruction of their soil. So long live the soil. We can do this. We can regenerate it. We can be the leading country in the world to do this. We don't need to be the #1 exporter of soil anymore. That's very critical to understand, and we're here to help. We're very accessible to get to, and we'll be glad to help you.
Long live the soil. And I always like to say that as we heal our soil, we're healing our souls at the same time. Right. And it is a beautiful mission. It's a heartfelt mission. People are in this because they care. They care about our world. They care about the people that love you and love each other. And so we want to relieve unnecessary suffering. There's enough necessary suffering that comes with the lifespan. And we just want to make sure that people are living. To me, it's a human rights issue that people need access to healthy food so that they can have healthy lives and healthy relationships, so we can have healthy communities and healthier hearts and happier minds and bodies. So thank you all for listening. Thank you so much, Jimmy. And we do have, the clock is ticking. Yeah. So we need to all act now. So do those steps and connect with us online. Thank you so much for listening.